The coffee had gone cold in the paper cup 20 minutes ago. Nobody noticed except the man holding it, watching from behind the camera equipment like he was studying something that mattered. Charles Bronson stood in the shadow of a lighting rig, still as carved stone, not hiding, just present. The way a man becomes when he's learned that observation reveals more than participation. Set of the Arizona Trail, 1975. Another Western, another paycheck, another chance to play the man he'd always been, just with better costumes. The Paramount soundstage stretched like an aircraft hangar. Fake desert built from painted canvas and trucked-in sand. Saloon facade that looked real from one angle revealed plywood and 2x4s from another. The kind of movie magic that impressed tourists and fooled nobody who worked there. Cast and crew moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency, cameramen checking angles, script supervisors timing scenes, makeup artists touching up foundation before the heat lamps turned everyone's face into a melting candle. The controlled chaos of professional filmmaking. Director's name was Marcus Webb, 42 years old, expensive haircut, Italian shoes that cost more than most people made in a month. 3 successful films behind him, enough success to believe his own publicity, enough power to treat people like furniture when he thought nobody was watching. Webb had the kind of authority that came with studio backing, the kind that made grown men bite their tongues when he spoke, the kind that turned talented people into nervous children afraid of disappointing daddy. He wore that power like cologne, applied too heavy, noticeable from across the room. The young actor's name was David Chen, 23. First speaking role in a major production. Parents immigrated from Taiwan when he was 5. Grew up in San Francisco speaking perfect English with perfect diction. Studied theater at UCLA. Waited tables for 3 years while auditioning for anything that didn't require him to play a laundryman or a houseboy. This role was different. 3 lines, maybe 40 seconds of screen time, playing a shopkeeper who gives the hero information, not the lead, not even supporting, but speaking English, playing a human being instead of a stereotype. First crack at legitimacy. David had been on set since 5 a.m., memorized his lines weeks ago, practiced in the mirror until his roommate told him to shut up. This was it, his moment. The thing he'd been working towards since his first acting class, professional film debut, real Hollywood production, Charles Bronson picture. The scene was simple. Bronson walks into the general store, asks about strangers who'd come through town. David's character provides information, tells him 3 men rode north toward the canyon, points the way. Bronson nods, leaves. 40 seconds that advance the plot and establish David's character as helpful, intelligent, trustworthy. They rehearsed twice. David hit his marks, delivered his lines clean, connected with Bronson. In the brief moment their characters interact. No problems, no complications. Professional work from a prepared actor. Then Webb decided the scene needed something extra. Cut, Webb called after the second rehearsal. David, come here. David approached the director's chair, eager to please, ready for notes, ready to improve, ready to prove he belonged on a set with actors like Charles Bronson. Webb looked at him like he was examining damaged goods. The lines aren't working. Sir, your delivery, too clean, too educated. This is a frontier shopkeeper, not a college professor. David nodded. Would you like me to adjust the accent? Make it more period appropriate? Webb's smile was the kind that didn't reach his eyes. I think we need something more authentic, more realistic. The way he said realistic carried weight, implication, assumption about what David should sound like based on what he looked like. Could you be more specific about what you're looking for? Webb stood up loud enough for the crew to hear. The character is Chinese, right? So maybe more Chinese, you know what I mean? David's face went very still. I'm not sure I understand. the accent, make it sound more foreign, more like what people expect, more believable. The set got quiet, not dead quiet. Work continued, but conversations lowered. People found reasons to be busy near the director's chair. Everyone understood what was happening. Everyone hoped it would resolve quickly. Everyone knew it probably wouldn't. David's voice stayed level, professional. The character is established as someone who's lived in this town for years. His English would be fluent. Webb's smile got wider, more condescending. David, this is a Western. Audiences have certain expectations. They see your face, they expect to hear a certain sound. We're making entertainment, not a documentary about immigration. The words hung in the air like smoke, poisonous, designed to reduce a trained actor to a collection of stereotypes, to remind him that no matter how hard he worked, how well he prepared, how professionally he conducted himself, some people would only see his face and hear what they expected to hear. David felt his chest tighten. 3 years of waiting tables, 6 months of auditions, weeks of preparation for 40 seconds of dialogue, all of it balanced on the edge of this moment. He could fight back, could argue, could demand artistic integrity, could also be fired, replaced, blacklisted as difficult. Never work in Hollywood again. I understand what you're asking, David said quietly, but I don't think it serves the story. Webb's voice got harder. I'm not asking, David. I'm directing. This is my film, my vision. If you can't deliver what I need, I'll find someone who can. The threat was clear. Comply or leave. Degrade yourself or lose everything you've worked for. Choose between dignity and opportunity. The kind of choice that shouldn't exist but always does for people who look different, sound different, threaten nothing except other people's assumptions. David looked around the set, crew members avoiding eye contact, other actors studying their scripts with sudden intensity, everyone hoping they wouldn't be forced to take sides, everyone grateful it wasn't happening to them. That's when Charles Bronson stepped out of the shadows. His footsteps made no sound on the soundstage floor. Just suddenly he was there, standing beside David, close enough that Webb had to look up to see his face, close enough that his presence changed the geometry of the conversation. Bronson didn't look angry, didn't look threatening, just looked interested, like he'd been watching something develop and decided it was time to participate. Problem? Bronson asked. One word, quiet, directed at Webb. Webb's confidence flickered. This wasn't some kid fresh out of acting school. This was Charles Bronson, star of the picture, box office draw. The reason the studio was making this movie, the reason Webb had a job just working through some character notes with David. Webb said his voice had changed, less commanding, more diplomatic. What kind of notes? Webb looked around. Crew members had stopped pretending to work. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see how this played out, waiting to see if the director would back down or double down, just trying to make the character more authentic. Bronson's brown eyes studied Webb's face, read it like a map of weakness and insecurity, like a text written in languages Webb didn't know he was speaking. David's character, Bronson said slowly, is an educated businessman who's lived in this town for 5 years. What's inauthentic about educated speech? Webb shifted his weight, started to answer, stopped, started again. Well, I just think audiences might expect what? The question cut through Webb's explanation like a knife through paper. Simple, direct, requiring an answer that Webb couldn't give without revealing exactly what kind of man he was. Webb looked at David, looked at the crew, looked back at Bronson, trapped between his own prejudices and the reality that Charles Bronson was questioning his judgment in front of 30 witnesses. I just want the performance to be believable, Webb said weakly. Bronson nodded, turned to David. Run the scene. As written, natural delivery. David hesitated, looked at Webb, looked back at Bronson. As written, Bronson repeated. David took his position, found his mark, centered himself the way they taught him at UCLA, professional actor preparing for professional work. Bronson walked to his mark, became his character instantly. The transformation was remarkable, not acting, becoming. The years fell away from his face. His posture shifted. Movement became economical, dangerous. The shopkeeper was talking to a gunfighter now, someone who'd killed men and would kill again if necessary. They ran the scene. David delivered his lines exactly as rehearsed, clean diction, intelligent inflection, the performance of an educated man providing information to a stranger, professional work from a prepared actor. When they finished, Bronson looked at Webb. Perfect, print it. The words carried finality, not suggestion, not request, decision made by the star of the picture, the man whose name was above the title, the reason people would buy tickets. Webb stood there for a moment, 30 people watching, waiting for his response. He could fight, could assert his authority as director, could also destroy his relationship with Charles Bronson, could tank the movie, could end his career. Right, Webb said, "Good, let's move on." The set exploded back into activity. Crisis averted, work resumed, but something had changed. The power dynamic had shifted. Webb had been reminded of his place in the hierarchy. David had been protected by someone with real authority. Bronson walked back to his spot behind the lighting equipment, picked up his cold coffee, didn't look at David, didn't acknowledge what had just happened, just returned to watching, waiting for his next scene. David found him there during lunch break. "Mr. Bronson, I wanted to thank you." Bronson looked at him. "For what?" "For standing up for me, for the scene." "I didn't stand up for you," Bronson said. "I stood up for the work. Your performance was right. His direction was wrong. That's all." David nodded, started to walk away, stopped, turned back. "Why did you help me?" Bronson considered the question. "You ever been the only one?" "Sir, the only one who looks like you in the room. The only one carrying the weight of representing everybody who looks like you. The only one who has to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified." David nodded. "Every day." "Then you know why." They stood in comfortable silence. Two professionals who understood the unspoken rules, the extra burdens, the constant pressure to prove worthiness for opportunities that others took for granted. "It doesn't get easier," Bronson said, "but it gets more manageable. You learn which fights to pick, which hills are worth dying on." "How do you know which ones?" "When someone tries to make you smaller than you are, that's always worth fighting." David finished his scenes that afternoon without incident. Webb gave him direction on blocking and timing. Never again mentioned accent or authenticity. The character remained as written, intelligent, dignified, human. The film was released 6 months later. David's 40 seconds of screen time led to 3 more roles, small parts that grew larger, characters who spoke perfect English and wore suits and solved problems without martial arts, roles that proved Asian actors could play human beings instead of stereotypes. He worked steadily for 15 years, never became a star, never needed to, built a career on professional competence and dignity, raised 2 children who grew up seeing their father in movies where he played doctors and lawyers and businessmen instead of laundrymen and houseboys. When Charles Bronson died in 2003, David attended the funeral, sat in the back, didn't speak to the family, just came to honor a man who taught him that real power isn't about dominating others. It's about knowing when to use your authority to protect those who have less. After the service, David was approached by a young Latino actor who'd worked with Bronson on his final film. The kid was nervous, grateful, said Bronson had done something similar for him, stood up to a producer who wanted him to sound more Mexican, protected his dignity when he couldn't protect his own. They talked for 20 minutes, shared stories, discovered they weren't alone, that Charles Bronson had a reputation among actors who looked different, sounded different, threatened nothing except other people's assumptions, a quiet reputation, never publicized, never used for promotion, just Charles Bronson using his power to protect people who needed protection. The young actor asked David the same question David had asked Bronson 30 years earlier: why did he help people he barely knew? David gave the same answer Bronson had given him: when someone tries to make you smaller than you are, that's always worth fighting. That's what 12 Seconds created. Not just one protected performance, but a philosophy that rippled forward through generations of actors. A lesson about using power responsibly, about standing up when standing up matters, about the difference between authority and bullying. Charles Bronson never spoke publicly about that day on set, never used it to promote himself as enlightened or progressive. Just another moment where he chose dignity over convenience, where he reminded a small man with temporary power that real strength protects those who need protection. 12 seconds to teach a director that talent doesn't have an accent. 12 seconds to save a young actor's dignity. 12 seconds to prove that real toughness isn't about intimidating the weak, it's about protecting them.